The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
What's that sound you hear? Knock, knock. It's Through the Glass Columns, and we are here to finish up a book, which we never do. Oh, okay, we do it once every season, but here we are, closing out with 2 chapters from The Dragon Reborn. Of course, we are your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. I am Greg, who is on a just sugar high of euphoria because I got to read the end of a book, and I never get to do that. And joining me is Tylor, who is just here and not so much on a sugar high. Tylor, what's going on?
I don't understand when you say I'm not on a sugar high. We just, 1, finished a Wheel of Time book, and that's my jam. And 2, we are about to start The Shadow Rising, which, let me tell you, those of you who in real time have to wait 3 weeks for the next episode that covers real chapters, oh my God, if you thought this was good, just wait. It's coming. I am pumped, I guess is what I am saying here. You're on a sugar rush. I am just excited about everything that is happening in podcast world, including, I think society has decided we can declare any anniversary as meaningful, right? Like we get like the 43rd anniversary edition of media properties now. So I think we should celebrate our year and a half anniversary. 3 books. I feel like it's a milestone. You're 20% of the way through this series.
Yay. Very excited to be 20% of the way, even though that really doesn't sound like that much. But page count wise, are we maybe a little ahead of that? Probably not. So you don't have those stats off the top of your head.
I both don't have those stats off the top of my head, but I know that there are like 7 books longer than all of the ones we've read and only 1 that is dramatically shorter. So my guess is on average, we have actually not read 20% by word count.
Fair enough. Well, before we get too ahead, I wanted to take your natural segue just to remind people what our schedule is coming up. So today we are discussing the last 2 chapters and the tiny little bit at the end of The Dragon Reborn. And then we will be back next week to do just a kind of general book discussion wrap up. This had previously been kind of combined with the chapters, but we wanted to separate them out this time, try something new. And we also have some visual discussion tonight that was going to take up some of the airtime. After that episode, we will disappear from your feeds for the holidays because, it's a busy time of year. And I get that we all want to read Wheel of Time books instead of talking to family, but go ahead, be a little extroverted, talk to somebody who loves you. And then we will return shortly after New Year's 2024 and begin The Shadow Rising. As Tylor said, it'll be about 3 weeks without us. And honestly, what better way to ring in the new year? Now, if you're listening far in the future, none of this means anything. So ignore all of it. The next episodes will just be in your feed and in your list. But we are very excited for season 4, but we are not getting there until we wrap up season 3. So first, Tylor, we have 2 different art discussions today, and I will go ahead and tell the audience that the first one requires a little Googling unless you are reading the right edition of the book. So Tylor, tell people what to Google / what to look at.
Yes. So the first image that we are going to be discussing today is the original cover of the Dragon Reborn. So if you search Dragon Reborn cover, this is the image you will find. I will note, however, that what you are most likely to see if you simply go to the first image that pops up is you will see the front cover of the Dragon Reborn, which depicts Rand reaching towards Kalendor with both Mat and Perrin in the foreground. If you go digging, just maybe like 5 or 6 images later, you will see the full wraparound image, which has that on the far right, and then a creepy Baalzamon face that goes along the spine of the book in the paperback edition. And then on the back, where you would get the blurb, wrapped around it were images of several Aiel hiding behind the redstone columns. So this is an image that, depending on which part you look at, there's a lot of different things going on in it. But it's actually one that I don't have too much disdain for, which is relatively rare among the original covers, because it actually depicts something that happened in the book relatively accurately. And other than Perrin looking like he belongs in the Conan books, this rings pretty true in a way that often the original covers don't. What was your thought upon viewing this image for the first time? Because it's obviously not the cover that you had seen possibly ever. I don't know how exposed you were to the original art before, even though you hadn't read the books.
Not at all. And this continues to look like the Hildebrandt brothers to me, who I'm familiar with from their Lord of the Rings and some Star Wars art. And I will just plug, hopefully I remember, but Tylor has provided me with an image of exactly what we're discussing. So if you need it, you can go to the Instagram account for Through the Glass Columns, which is just at Through the Glass Columns. Is it? I don't
Yeah.
know. Search Instagram for it. I was suddenly panicked that was too long. One of our social media accounts that was too long. And so you can find us find our account and see the image there. Boy, you got me excited just a second ago because you almost said Through the Red Columns, which is so close to what our podcast is called, and yet
Yeah.
not. So, this is definitely kind of old school, cheesy kind of van art, but
Yeah.
it's not bad. It's among the less offensive there. So, especially with your context that this would wrap around the spine, it actually strikes me as more clever than I originally thought. And I can see exactly what you mean, that the face would appear kind of nicely on the spine,
Yeah.
making the cover actually very Star Wars, right? This looks like the
Yeah.
original A New Hope poster where Luke is holding up a yellow lightsaber for some reason. And yet it's like a Kylo Ren lightsaber. So
Yeah.
maybe it was prefiguring that. But it's got the excitement, it's got the thrills. I'm not one to go for a muscly ripped dude kind of bulging out on the image, but hey, if that's your thing, we got one. And his name is Matt. Is that who that one is?
I,
Yes, with
I
the axe is Matt.
no, the axe is Perrin. Matt is the
No, the axe
dagger.
is Perrin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't entirely get Perrin at all on this image. I tend to think the front cover is very good, but not great, and mostly because I think the, kind of background, the thing that we're primarily focusing on, Rand and the sword, is fantastic. And then both Mat and Perrin just don't look like Mat and Perrin to me. I get absolutely nothing out of creepy face on the spine, but I think the Aiel on the back is really well done. I think they look like a desert culture. You can tell that they're designed to be kind of like blending in with a particular pattern that does not fit this at all. They get the weapons right, which is something that very rarely happens on these original covers. They're often just kind of generic fantasy soldiers. And, at least we don't have any Trollocs here that are depicted as just humans in helmets with horns. So we're doing better than the second cover on the original books. Overall, I think I'm kind of with you. This is old school. It's not my favorite, but for the old school covers, this is about as good as it gets. At least as far as I'm concerned. It accurately depicts the book, which is a major win. Any other thoughts that you have about this cover? I think we included it mostly because we want to make sure we talk about every one of the original covers, but they're not my favorite. Anything to add before we move on to our second ill-advised discussion of visual media in a single episode?
I will just say I do like the back cover's depth. It
Yeah.
does look something like the the dwarf halls from Lord of the Rings films or old art. And I just like the depth to make the stone seem very large and cavernous. So that's working for me. But yes, take us on, faithful Tylor. So we are, of course, this week discussing I already forgot the numbers.
55 and 56.
55 and 56. So we're going to start with chapter 55, What is Written in Prophecy. And our second discussion of visual media on a non-visual podcast is the chapter icon for chapter 55, which is a brand spanking new one. Wow. So talk to us. Well, actually, I was going to throw it to you, but usually you have me describe what I see and what I can think about. So I'll just continue on to say what we have here is a probably the largest icon I can recall us seeing
Yep.
thus far, which is a dragon that has busted out of the frame, quite large. And so we have both its tail and its head and kind of front legs totally outside the square icon of the chapter. Now, notable features here, I would say first and foremost, the 5 claws on each of the feet of the dragon are specifically rendered
Yeah.
in a splayed fashion so that you can easily count all 5 on every one of the 4 paws. And then I would also note it is kind of an Eastern dragon, if I
Yeah.
were to kind of characterize the dragon. And what's striking to me is it is a dark dragon with very light accent lines. And inside the square, it is actually also filled in black. So
Yeah.
this is a very dark image from those we have seen, and that's something we often track is where is the balance of color, very much on the black and of the spectrum, and kind of filling even more of the page than it usually does. So I might not guess that, given that we
Yeah.
do see this in the chapters we read tonight. I actually think it's the second one, but we are seeing this as I assume the symbol for Rand,
Yeah.
and to have it be so dark is striking.
Yeah.
How'd I do?
I think really well. I think the thing that's interesting to me is everything you said, especially about the contrast between light and dark in this image, I think is exactly spot on. You described it well. It is an extremely dark image. It's a black border with a black dragon and a black background, and the only white is the lines between it. And yet somehow I don't look at this image and immediately think that screams really dark, because both sides of it have broken outside of that box. And so to me, that is really the defining feature of this, is that it's a really, really dark icon that has almost managed to like break out of or escape that darkness. And as an icon for Rand, who is simultaneously like the hero of the world and potentially destined to go insane, I think that's a really interesting kind of place to start, is, you know, a really dark image that has almost kind of broken through those boundaries into the light a bit more than we might originally look just looking at the center of the icon. But no, I think that that contrast is exactly what this is going for. I have nothing else to say other than really solid guess. This is absolutely Rand's new chapter icon. We had talked before about the heron marked blade being a temporary icon for him. Welcome to his more permanent chapter icon.
And to your point, I will also note that while when we discuss light and dark contrasts on these icons, we often talk about dark as in like evil, dark side.
Yeah.
Dark is also just Sidene. Yes. Pause for Tylor's nod. So we know that that's the male kind of part of the one power, and that is not necessarily evil in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of mythologies that have to do with balance, and that, you know, one side needs to be counteracted by the other. So while we have often likened darkness to the evil one, to the dark friends, all of that that stuff, it could just be that this is just an expression of him being the kind of figurehead of the Sidene,
Yeah.
the more delicious half of the black and white cookie.
We need to split a black and white cookie sometime because apparently we have different opinions about what is the more delicious side. But I have nothing to add other than that. I think that's exactly right. Is that this is a series that plays around with light and dark in a lot of different ways, both in terms of kind of degrees of lightness and darkness, but then also that idea that what is kind of viewed by society as dark is not necessarily the same as what is actually evil or bad. This transitions into not really a third ill-advised discussion of visual media on a non-visual podcast, but something that needs to at least be vaguely mentioned, I suppose. We have referenced my tattoo several times, and at this point, we now have all of the chapter icons that comprise that tattoo. It is Rand's dragon on the top, and then Matt's dice and Perrin's wolf in the middle, and then the Wheel of Time image that ends most chapters at the bottom. And so it's kind of my tattoo for the three boys, the three major characters. I don't know if anyone actually cares to see it, but Greg will probably post it on social media, maybe. I don't know if that's weird.
What's that? Yep, I just got a call from Instagram headquarters and they say they want a shirtless photo of Tylor. That's what the people demand. And
okay, yeah.
Hey, if you all like pale, let's get pale.
Even my hair has abandoned any pigment, y'all. It is pale up in here. That being said, there is no need for commentary on my tattoo. Why don't we drive straight into chapter 55, what is written in prophecy? So the chapter begins with a Rand POV, which is new for this book. He enters the heart of the stone and sees Kalendor. Belal approaches and tells him to take it. Rand recognizes him from his dreams and says that he has dreamed of Belal putting the girls in a cage. Belal seems to kind of constantly be surprised at how little Rand knows. He seems to have suspected that Luz Theron, as he refers to him, would know more. He seems to think that Rand is significantly misunderstanding parts of the conversation or what's going on. In particular, whenever the conversation turns to Baal-Zaman, Belal seems kind of dismissive very quickly. And then it becomes apparent that Belal is trying to stretch out this fight as long as possible until Rand grabs for Kalendor. He forces him into a corner, makes it so he is about to reach for Kalendor, and then Moraine arrives. She basically gets laughed off by Belal and then immediately murders him with balefire. It happens very quickly, and I appreciate it. She, however, is very quickly, after telling Rand to take Kalendor, she is then enveloped in lightning from a pool of darkness around her, from which Baal-Zaman emerges. Rand does manage to take Kalendor before he is overwhelmed, and then he touches the power and Kalendor begins to glow brightly enough that it is blinding him, and then Baal-Zaman flees. Rand copies whatever Baal-Zaman did to leave and then thinks to himself, I am the hunter now. We are then in Egwene's POV. She feels the stone shaking while she is in Teleron Riode. At first, she despairs at not being able to find the cell that she and the others are in the waking world, but then she sees that the Aes Sedai who is watching over her, Amiko, seems to be drifting off into sleep while using a ter'angreal, and so she is making her way kind of driftingly into the world of dreams. When she comes back in for a second time, Egwene puts a shield around her and thinks that must have stopped her from being able to have a shield or to channel in either the waking world or the world of dreams. Egwene then tries to break the lock on the cell and wakes up. When she is then awake, she is within the cell. They try to open the door. It is not open, but the other girls do say that Amiko did cry out, and so whatever was done to her in the world of dreams did have some effect. They still can't channel. The shield is still there, and so Egwene says that she needs to get back to sleep, and she won't be able to unless Nynaeve sings to her. We then jump into Matt's POV. Matt and Julin are carefully traversing the stone, trying to make sure that they don't get seen by any other High Lords. They are in a torture chamber, it appears, and then they see a woman who seems to be awake but also asleep. She is saying, help me, and it appears that she can only move from the neck up. This is Amiko, who has been kind of oddly affected by being shielded in the world of dreams while only partially there. Matt and Julin are then able to open the cell, let out the girls to their shock, and Matt and them basically get into a sparring match about whether he deserves thanks and they eventually decide, yeah, probably kind of. They knock out Amiko, and then they are no longer shielded. They can channel. Nynaeve heals the other girls. Matt says that they need to leave immediately, but they seem intent on tracking down the Black Aja. And while Matt is trying to talk them out of doing anything, they run off and he follows, saying he is going to keep them safe. We then switch into Perrin's POV. He is still searching for Fail, which is how he is now referring to her in the narration. He has rescued her 2 times already in the world of dreams, and he sees Rand, but he quickly kind of disappears away from him. Hopper warns Perrin of being here too strongly, and then Perrin says that no, he is going to find Fail whatever the cost, and then uses his hammer to destroy a brass door that he finds. He sees a falcon and breaks the chain holding it. He then wakes up, bleeding from all of the wounds that he has suffered in the world of dreams, and Fail is able to wake with him and calls him her wolf, and he calls her, or her blacksmith, I'm sorry, and he calls her his falcon. And then we cut into Rand's POV again. He is in an empty heart of the stone that is different and not quite the same. He doesn't quite realize that he is in Teleron Riode. He barely avoids balefire that is thrown at him from Baalzamon, but it doesn't seem to affect Kalendor. In fact, it bounces off of it. Rand then pursues him and kind of repeatedly is either killing Trollocs or Murdrail, or doesn't seem to understand what's going on, but the air around him turns into water and he fights it off, or the ground below him turns into mud and he fights it off. He then arrives back in the heart of the stone and battles Baalzamon again, killing him with Kalendor. The body falls to the ground, and then he says something along the lines of, "Fool, the great lord can never be defeated." Rand thinks he has won, returns to the real world, raises Kalendor, and the crowds begin cheering and crying out that Althor is the dragon. Wow, that was a long summary. I really need just a drink or a pause, or you to have your own thing where you have to talk for 5 minutes. So just say words for a minute and then I'll get back in on the conversation.
I was going to use the joke where I just end the show because I think I've used that before when you have very long things. Wow, what a climax. And I guess I will say I found it moved very, very quickly. And I
Yeah.
think, how much you just talked is a credit to that so much happens in this. And I do think, as opposed to usual, when we have a plot heavy chapter, I feel like we could pick out any single vignette of this and talk for a good 40
Yeah.
minutes on some of them. But I will say, kind of my general notes to myself were just like, last week I referenced Dunkirk as kind of that intercutting plots that quickens as they all
Yeah.
converge, and this just felt like it was dialed up to 11, and we got
Mhm.
even more of that with actual convergence of all these plot lines coming together and these characters overlapping. And as we jumped between them, I found myself getting a little I would say disoriented, but not like unproductively so. Like
Yeah.
actually in the literal sense, like I needed to orient myself in each one. And
I
once I did, I felt good.
I actually, as I was reading these chapters, accidentally skipped a page. 2 of my pages stuck together, and it took me a long time to realize it. Because in the world of dreams, I was like, "Oh yeah, Perrin is watching Rand do all of the things. This makes sense." So I think that's kind of intentional by Robert Jordan, right? It's bouncing around so quickly; it is kind of hard to keep track of all the balls that are in the air in this chapter. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is Robert Jordan is not just wrapping up in this chapter. He is laying a lot of like subtle, small hints at things that will come later that I think are really easy to miss amongst the action. But like just in this first section, if nothing else, we get a lot of hints from Belal about the things that Rand may be misunderstanding or that the readers are misunderstanding, right? There's a lot of talk about Luz Theron not remembering and about Belal thinking that Baalzamon is not whoever Rand thinks he is. More on that in the next chapter. But the fact that we're getting so much kind of dense world building in the midst of the chapter wrapping up, or of the book wrapping up, I think is what to me stood out so much about this section. Did you have anything to say about this early section of the chapter where I feel like we get kind of an oddly large amount of world building for the kind of climactic action sequence of the book, basically?
Um, No, I was going to make a dirty joke about your pages being stuck together. Like, wow, you really do look like Wheel of Time, but that's beneath us. That's immature. So we should not pause for that.
Yeah, how
Pause
dare
for
you
edit
even think about making
and
that joke? That is definitely going to make it into the final cut. Continue.
and so, then the game in my head becomes which of these details matters.
Yeah,
And so Moraine showing up and kind of instantly killing a Forsaken who has just told us essentially like, wow, you really don't get it if you are worried about Baalzamon,
yeah,
is the kind of like deep tease that feels like it matters. Like, that's a nothing Jon Snow, except then the character is killed off and can't reveal kind of what's really going on.
yeah,
Within that seems very much related to the fact that, Lewis Theron continues to be someone they all know and are all waiting for, and a reminder that Rand may be ascending to be the Dragon Reborn, but really hasn't caught up with that identity of his
yeah.
of the last dragon. And so that those two problems seem intertwined in my mind. I'm making a very good intertwined gesture with my hand to continue our visual references tonight. So I think of the kind of opening sections, that's the deep tease I was interested in learning more about in future books.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the moment that really works the best for me in that kind of like really well gestured intertwining that you were describing there is there's a moment where Bilal is kind of taunting Rand and trying to goad him into taking Kalendor. And there's a moment where Bilal literally refers to him as Luz Theron. And then I think like literally the next line is when Rand basically thinks to himself, what if I try to reach for Kalendor and there is a wall that prevents me from touching it? And that I found to be a really interesting moment because there are a lot of things I expected Rand to be kind of doubtful about here, right? Like, is he already crazy? Is he going to destroy the world? Is he going to die in the battle against the Dark One? All of these things make sense to me, but am I the Dragon Reborn is not the doubt that I expected him to bring into this final confrontation. So I was really surprised, even on like a fifth reread, that that was the thing he was focusing on so much in that battle. Did that stand out to you, or was there anything else in kind of Rand's monologue throughout this sequence that was interesting as we were working through it? Because it is the first time we've really been in his head in a real way for most of the book.
Well, and it I guess my reaction is to say it was most interesting for not being interesting. It's like he hadn't
Yeah,
changed a lot. I think because of all the ways in which he existed in rumor and hearsay across the last 400 pages,
yeah,
he could have returned kind of monstrous or superpowered or something like that. And it just kind of felt like Rand again. And like you're
yeah,
saying, when he doubts it, it's like, okay, he's still just a boy from the Two Rivers and needs to, still assert himself if he's going to take it over. And maybe we see that happen over the course of this chapter, but especially early Rand just felt like Rand again. So
yeah.
way to not let the world change you, buddy.
Yeah, and I guess if what we're saying is Rand is Rand is Rand, then the big change in the early section of this book is when Moraine arrives and goes full Danny DeVito meme. So anyway, I started blasting, right? Like she arrives and 10 seconds later, there is a dead Forsaken. And I think you already referenced this, but I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago when Moraine basically declared out of nowhere, apropos of nothing, I am much more dangerous than I once was. And this felt like the simplest summation of that if we are thinking of Rand as kind of ascending into this place of, kind of globally important power, Moraine is already there. She just doesn't have the title.
Mm. And because of how she presented that, I think of I guess it's Galadriel says that the fellowship stands on the edge of a knife, and
Yeah,
it feels like that's where Moraine is. It's like, we have a different trajectory for her on the show, so I don't want to necessarily equate those two, but it does feel like she herself has said, I'm in a very dangerous place. You essentially just allude to the fact she's kind of trigger happy, right? I mean,
yeah,
this is a classic movie thing where like the guy is about to explain like the next step and who's the boss and who's behind the scheme, and the rookie cop just comes in and blasts him away,
Yep.
blows him away with a shotgun, and yet it's Moraine, and that is not a rookie. That is somebody who should know more than anybody else.
Yep.
And so then my question becomes, did she just take him out because she had the shot and it was a Forsaken?
Forsaken.
Yes.
Yep.
Um, or did she take him out purposefully so he could not reveal something that she doesn't think Rand is ready to know yet? That to me sounds like Dumbledore, right? Dumbledore always is
Mm.
like, I wasn't quite ready for Harry to know. And Moraine has played that role before. So I think it's possible that that could be true here.
Yeah, and I cannot respond to that in any meaningful way without giving away hints. I don't really have anything else to say about the Rand section, right? I think we set up Rand as a character who, as you say, is in many ways very different, but in a lot of important ways is exactly the same as he has been. And then we're also setting up Moraine as just being in a very different position than we saw her before, right? Like you said, trigger happy rather than kind of cautious and waiting, and also just over her head so much in this book. That then leads us into our next set of characters, the girls, as I often refer to them, even though obviously they are the women. Egwene in this section, she is experimenting and she's trying new things and she's doing things that she doesn't know what they're going to do, and they have results that would be absolutely horrific if they happened to anyone other than a member of the Black Aja. I don't have any like big coherent thoughts here other than like this is the least exciting of the three plots, if you will, and I'm not sure if Robert Jordan did enough for me to like win me over to this being as integral as the other few sections we're going to get later on towards kind of finishing this story.
I think, I'm going to just play my old card, which is to say, I found it a little confusing as we skipped between the planes, right? To
Yeah.
go from the real world to Teleron Riyadh. And I just couldn't always wrap my head around what was happening where. So my big takeaway from it would be just that the effects that are bleeding between them should not be happening in the way they are happening, which usually means as powerfully as they're happening, right? What happens in one place should not happen in the other. But Egwene and perhaps her Terangrial
Yep.
are driving this and making it so she can do whatever she wants and really affect the two.
Well,
And that starts to feel powerful in a different way.
so I do want to be really careful with that, which is that Egwene seems to be able to affect other people in the world of dreams in a really powerful way that maybe isn't what we expected. But it is worth noting she breaks the lock in the world of dreams and then wakes up and the lock is fully intact in the real world. So there are still some kind of limitations on what she can do and what it affects, but at least in terms of the interaction between her channeling in the world of dreams and that affecting Amiko in the real world, the effect seems to be unpredictable and, as you say, kind of new and different from what we've maybe seen or heard of before. So I think it's exactly right to be thinking how much of this is Egwene that's odd and how much of it is that we don't know anything about the world of dreams and how much of it is that Amiko was using a weird Terangrial that we don't know anything about. But I think you're right. This is a new mystery that's being put here. How does the world of dreams affect the real world? And we get kind of mixed results in this chapter.
And I think I predicted last week or maybe the week before that, like, oh, good, we have to go save Fail in the world of dreams, and Egwene will be there and be really active. And though those plot lines overlapped, they really were kind of
Yeah.
separate, and that it wasn't that we ended up with those characters converging there. So that was a surprise. I don't really have positive or negative feelings about it. It's just like, oh, well, took a stab. It didn't
Yeah.
work out that way.
Everything you just said there caused me in a way that I will in no way elaborate on to immediately like flash forward to book 13. So I have no cogent
Oh,
thoughts that don't spoil things, but it's foreshadowing really well, you guys. I promise. Only 10 more books. Um to me then
You should
okay,
always remember there are rereaders listening who
that's fair.
appreciate you and appreciate that kind of line. So never hesitate to make the comment. And if we have listeners who, like me, are here for the first read, yeah, he's an annoying, pompous jerk, but it's entertaining to some people.
Yeah, it's entertaining to some people, like me, and also me. That's really what I'm here for. Um, I think for me, the two really interesting things that stood out to me in this section is one, we already kind of vaguely discussed, we don't know how it works, but the oddity of how does shielding someone who's asleep and it affecting them when they're awake is very, very weird. The other one that I found really interesting was at the end of this section. So if you have anything before that, please jump in. But after we had spent so much time in this book talking about the conflict between Egwene and Nynaeve and what was causing it and why was it so severe and how was Elaine mediating it and was the slap necessary? And yes, the slap was definitely necessary. Like there was a lot going on with that conflict in this book. And we don't really get a direct resolution of it, but we do get Egwene asking Nynaeve to hum to her like she did when she was a little girl. And that feels like the best we're going to get, and it's a touching moment, even if I'm not sure it entirely fits with the way that conflict was portrayed prior to it, but I appreciate it. What did you think about the end of this sequence?
I think sweet is right. Actually, what came to mind was the end of the Grapes of Wrath, which I won't elaborate on, but like
Yeah,
this kind of moment of shared humanity kind of deep in this crisis was lovely and nice. It did feel well, maybe I'll save some of this for next week, but it does feel like if we look at their plot line on the whole, it's like, oh crap, we didn't have enough to do. Let's give them a conflict and then just have it kind of
yeah.
end in a whimper at the end. And there are worse crimes happening in fiction all the time, but it doesn't ultimately move me all that much.
Yeah, I will say this is something that works really well. I think if you are reading the first three books straight through in like a couple months, because I think then you are seeing the progression go from Nynaeve as the wisdom and Egwene as the girl who was her apprentice to the accepted novice, but kind of on the same level, to both of them accepted, to Egwene then going back to that original dynamic and kind of asking, will you be that kind of mother figure that you were when I was young, right? I think that works really well if you see that progression go quickly, but when you break it into a year and a half of, 2 chapter chunks, I think you lose that through line a little bit, and then it just feels like you said, like it's kind of tossed in. We needed a resolution. Here's a resolution, right? I think it resonates better the more you kind of look at it as a whole. But there's a part of me that says then Robert Jordan needs to make us look at it as a whole a little better, either in the early sections of this book or in the description here.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me, and I think it's always good when you can point out ways in which the experience that we're going through kind of hurts the
Yeah,
experience. So I will readily acknowledge that. And I think there's always a sweetness to a character reverting to a childlike stage,
yeah,
although like when people in my life do that, I just want to like bust heads because it's annoying. But in a book, it's like really endearing. And
yeah.
I was just in my head daydreaming about Harry Potter, and kind of the image of Hagrid carrying Harry deep into
Mm,
book 7 is kind of that same, like, well, you can grow up and you can mature, but some part of you still needs to be taken care of. So
yeah.
it is kind of beautiful.
Absolutely. That was a lovely note to end that section on. Let's talk about Matt and all of the Matt things, right? I think that for me, number one, we just need to recognize this is the first time I've seen it in a single chapter where it was this stark. We went from the Egwene section kind of feeling like, oh, this is touching, this works, to immediately Matt with like quips and jokes, and he is telling us things, then immediately contradicting them. Like Matt just reads different, and I appreciate it every time we transition to a Matt chapter, or in this case, a Matt, page and a half. That being said, nothing happens in this section. Matt walks through a hallway and then sees a lady and doesn't know what happened to her, even though the reader does. And then the girls don't thank him. And that's most of this section. What was your take on Matt's ending in this book?
I feel like he had his big moment last week,
Yeah.
so it's okay that that's the heroic action and this kind of moment of there's some good comedy and like I'm
Yeah.
here, I saved you, and they're like, yep, whatever, let's move on. So that was kind of amusing, but I think he got his big boom moment last
Yeah.
week, and now it's just kind of he's already in denouement mode as he wraps up his
Yeah.
plot.
Yeah, I think then if we're not super interested in the mat of it all, right? He's fun to read, but there's not a ton for him here. I think you're exactly right. I hadn't thought that his big moment was last week, but that's spot on. To me, then Nynaeve gets the spotlight in the second half of this section because she gets to knock out Amiko and talk over Matt and heal the others and walk out on Matt in the middle of one of his patented speeches. And that's just straight Nynaeve all over. And I think my only complaint about that section is that we don't get it from Nynaeve's POV, right? Like
Mm.
she's the star of the section, but otherwise it's fun, it works, it moves the plot forward. This was a section to wrap up something that we couldn't quite do from Egwene's POV is kind of how I viewed it.
Well, and in the moment, it felt like, oh, good, we're gonna go wrap up the Black Gaja thing now too. Like
Mm-hmm.
we got to move quickly through this, and then it was like, oh no, that's book four business. It would appear, or
Yeah.
book 4, 5, 6 business. So we didn't get a resolution to that, but to have Nynaeve, like you say, kind of straight up all business, still working on this very serious problem,
Yeah.
works and is fun.
Absolutely. Perrin is a good character who chases a falcon around through dreams with his wolf friends telling him he's there too strongly. I don't have notes. It was a fun ride. I think it was to me, if Rand is the kind of most important part of this section, he gets the beginning and the ending, and then we get kind of the three kind of side sections in between. This was the one that worked the best for me, if only because I think it was tied into the love story that had been developed pretty well over the previous 10, 15 Perrin and Fail chapters. Is that your takeaway as well, or were you kind of less taken by this section because I'm in love with Perrin?
No, I think that was my takeaway. The moment you referenced, although you butchered it in your summary, where she says, "My blacksmith,"
Oh, my black.
right? That's what she says. Yeah.
I'm used to my wolf being like a thing at some point eventually, probably. My bad.
But it felt good that she used that name again,
Yeah.
but it was not dismissive. It was
Mm-hmm.
actually, now I've learned what being a blacksmith means, and I've learned who you are, and now I'm using that as a compliment because that's the side of you I love and the one I want to be with. So
Yeah.
sweet romance, kissy kissy, beautiful. Now let's get to the stabbing.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that. I guess the only other thing is I think you're exactly right to point out my blacksmith being kind of touching instead of dismissive. The other piece that really stood out to me is at the beginning of this section, Perrin is referring to Fail as Fail in the narration, and that is just a stark change from
Mm.
everything before. Um, so then we're back to Rand, and stuff happens, right? He stabs Baalzamon in the heart. He uses Kalendor to walk through Teleron Riod and then back into the real world without fully knowing what he's doing. Like, this is what we've been waiting for. If we were talking about this book was slow, here's the fast. Did it do it for you?
Yeah, it felt like this was the level up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what better D&D or video game thing than picking up a weapon that gives you new abilities and you're suddenly there. I have in my notes, it was related to the first part and this part where it's like there's just this crazy, like I called it a double doubling, where it's like
Yeah.
we are in multiple planes in this reality and then across time as well, both in the sense of this is Lewis Theron back and is the cycle renewed, and then it's like then we're going across dimensions too, so we can have the stone across all these places. And it's kind of crazy, and yet I would not say I would be somewhere in the middle. I did not get lost in it, which I think is a huge credit to Robert Jordan, but I also didn't find it particularly compelling. And I think that's because it starts to feel like nothing has consequence when we just have so many realities. And I mean, I think the reference is in the book too, where it's like, oh, it's the same thing that's happened the last couple times
Yeah.
we've been around on these books. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to know, like, oh, well, this time it matters. And there are some hints of that next next chapter, but yes.
Totally. First off, I think I'm hearing you correctly, but I just want to make sure the word lose therein does not have an I in
Lose.
it. Yes. Second, I think that for me, the thing that you're identifying here is exactly right. It's that this book ends exactly the same as book one and book two, but in a different place, right? In all three of those books, Rand goes to the important place that is either the name of the book or the thing that we've been referencing for the entire book. And then he takes a sword made of fire that he either makes himself or doesn't know how it gets made or is already hanging in the sky there. And then he battles Baal-Zimon and stabs him through the heart, and the wound on his side bleeds. That's the story. It's happened 3 times in a row. And so I think there's a part of me that this is the moment where I'm like, okay, this is getting a little repetitive now. And then the thing that lets me out of it is at the end of this chapter, there's a body, which hasn't happened before. And then I don't think this is a real spoiler. In the next chapter, we get confirmation. The fact that there was a body means that we saw someone die. And as we always talk about with like movies and TVs, like show me the body. Robert Jordan showed you the body, right? It actually died. And hopefully that means that we now have, I guess 9 more mainline books, or no, even more than that, a bunch more books. And they're not all going to be about battling Baal-Zimon in the sky, I hope.
Yeah. So I guess where my head is stuck is on, we talked before about I think I referenced the Green Knight and the Dark Tower books from Stephen King, how it's like when you get these stories where you're in a recursive loop, and spoiler free, but Loki just did this really nicely.
Okay.
But you get into a recursive loop, and the challenge becomes, what do you do different to break the loop? And
Yeah.
so I'm thinking again about, okay, so it was the body. So what is the difference that causes there to be a body? So to me, is that Calendor? Is it, I liked the heron marked blade, and so it was kind of sad to be like, oh well, maybe we're leaving that behind, because it is a part of Rand's father's heritage, like that side of Rand as well. And it felt like the sword was a surprise back in the first book, as I recall, that that Baal-Zimon was really not expecting it. And so here it's like, well, this is the sword of prophecy, what was written in prophecy, indeed. And so there's no surprises here, and yet this is the one that seems to come to the other outcome. So all that is the big mush in my head. And if I'm not being particularly articulate, it's just like I want to straighten that all out, but I don't think I'm supposed to be able to yet. I think I'm going to toot my own horn and say these are the questions I'm supposed to be asking, but won't get answers to yet.
And I think that's exactly what Robert Jordan kind of wants to be doing at the end of this book. It seems more than either of the other two. It felt like the last 2 books had really kind of clean endings where it was like, here's all of the threads, I'm wrapping them up, and then we'll set up what's coming next. This feels like he's as much muddying the water as he is resolving in this conclusion, right? He's doing a lot of things that we've seen before, but in ways that are just enough different to start asking exactly those questions that you are asking, and that I will refuse to answer steadfastly ever on this show. I think if that is the end of the big epic conclusion, then we need to dive into the little chapter that wraps up after it. Did you have any last thoughts on the entirety of what is written in prophecy?
Let's save it for next week, because I think anything else I could say is kind of thinking about it as the climax to the book, and we'll again deal with everything all together next week. So take us into chapter 56, a little chapter called People of the Dragon, which I will say I expected very little from, and there's actually kind of a cool big revelation in this. So go ahead, my liege.
Very interestingly, this chapter begins first off with me being called your liege, which I was not expecting at all. But second, with a POV free piece of narration where we hear that people have been dreaming of Rand battling Baal-Zimon and taking Calendor, and they wake to see the dragon banner above above the stone, know that he is the actual dragon, and begin chanting Althor the dragon, Althor the dragon. We then go to Matt's
and
POV.
and and the who's down in Whoville, the tall and the small, right? It had that feel to it.
It
Sorry, go ahead. Get us into
absolutely
the
did.
movie.
Matt is then shaking his head as he hears the chanting below. The Aiel and the High Lords have been following Rand around since he declared himself. We learned that there are about 200 Aiel in the stone. They lost about a third of their numbers, but either killed or captured 10 times that many. Ruark, who is the clan chief of one of the Aiel clans, is reading in the area. We learned that Matt recently flirted with Avienda and it did not go well, and that he hasn't been able to separate Bane and Chiad to be able to flirt with them at all. Everyone seems to have been surprised to hear that Perrin is in Tyr and that he has, quote, a companion. Moraine is talking with the girls as well as Matt and reveals this, and then says that she will see to him soon. But first, Moraine needs to show them something that she has found. She has found a seal to the Dark One's prison. This time it is intact, unlike all of the previous times when the seals have been broken. Nynaeve then starts to kind of ask why that matters and what is going on. They need to track down the Black Aja. And then Matt starts to ask whether he and the girls are the people of the dragon. He doesn't understand how the prophecy has come true without that portion of it. And at this point, Ruark says that men of the Aiel who want to be clan chiefs go to Roidian, and there they are marked with a dragon on their arm, and he reveals it to them. And he says that the Aiel are known only to the clan chiefs as the people of the dragon. Moraine is surprised by this, and Matt says at least he's glad that it's done. And the girls seem to say, no, we still need to track down the Black Aja and the Forsaken. But Moraine then steps in and says, no, the Dark One has not been defeated. We don't just have kind of the wrap up left to do. The Dark One, who was supposedly killed by Rand, left a body. The Dark One would never do that. This must be someone who was impersonating the Dark One as Baal Zaman. At which point, Egwene, as I noted in my notes, remembers chapter 21. And there was a poem there that linked Ishamael to Baal Zaman. That seems to be who has been using this moniker, another one of the Forsaken. Moraine seems to accept this theory, although she does seem to have some doubts. And at this point, Berelain, the first of Mayenne, arrives. She has a message which was given to her and is delivered to Moraine. And then she tells Ruark that she is planning to see Rand that night before she leaves. Moraine then reads the letter which was delivered to her. It says, Luz Theron is mine, and is signed Lanfear. And Matt says that they can count on him when Moraine asks whether he will help them in facing down the Forsaken. But as he does so, he is planning to run. Then we get a nice, pretty little bit of prophecy, and we end book 3 of The Wheel of Time. Like you said, this is a quick chapter. I think it felt like it was supposed to be there just to wrap up all the little loose ends. And then it kind of dangles a couple of really nice hints of what is to come. What stood out to you? Because this is the kind of chapter where I think each reader will have a different major takeaway. And I'm not sure which reader you are here.
So what comes to mind is I think it's the end of the Two Towers movie, although it might be like a particular edition of it, where it's like Frodo and Sam are like, they have a very good character moment. I think this is after Sam's kind of speech that gets quoted all the time. And then
Oh, yeah.
they're talking about the stories. That's right. The stories that get told. And Frodo looks deep in his eyes and said, Frodo wouldn't have made it far without his Sam. And it's like a happy moment. And then you just kind of pan up and they show Mount Doom in the far distance and the
Yeah.
dragons and the Nazgul. And you're like, oh, right. Like there's still a lot to go on. This very much felt like the same spirit. It's like, yep, the Ewoks are singing. Everything's great. But let's pan up and remember we still have a whole lot of problems.
Yeah.
And it's very clear to our discussion tonight that Robert Jordan knew exactly that he was going to keep going by now and was going to have a lot of material built in for the next one. And so I think then this just becomes a series of dangling threads. The Black Aja are still out there. The fact that Baal Zaman is not gone is still out there. And then the the note from Lanfear. I'm just summarizing your summary now for people who tuned out. And but I would say the most compelling part to me is the fact that, I think I'd been asking how the Aiel are going to fit into all this. And to me, that's the revelation that matters here. It's like, oh, this is going to be Rand's army, is kind of how I took that sign. Like, this is going to be, they are the people of the dragon. They are the ones of prophecy. They're going to follow along.
Yeah.
And he, so many prophecies are like the one that can unite the clans in different world
Yeah.
mythologies. And it feels like that is what his prophecy is becoming, that he can pull together these factions that have warred for a long time and hopefully save the realm. But we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that we are now kind of bordering dangerously on another thing we were going to talk about next week in the episode wrap up. But I will note the way that this revelation comes about is Ruark kind of raises his sleeve and shows that his arm has been marked with a dragon. I will note that we have gotten a prophecy about Rand that twice and twice he shall be marked. Once the heron and twice the heron we have already gotten, but the other two marks are once the dragon and twice the dragon. So we may be looking at Rand having an even more direct connection to this story that Ruark is giving about how the men are marked with the dragon than we maybe would have considered before.
And you referenced this in the first part of the episode where we were talking about the book cover. It feels a little Dune too.
Yeah.
Like you pointed out the gosh, I'm not going to remember but the people native to the planet in Dune look like how the Aiel are put on there.
Yeah.
And what is that except the story of a messiah that, unites the peoples in some ways. I
And
don't know.
then
Dune's tough.
and then it goes horribly, horribly wrong in Dune. Like if you don't stop
Yeah.
at that first book, it is not a happy story that the Atreides are positive at the end
Yeah.
of that book. I don't want to spoil a movie that hasn't come out yet, even though the book is like 30 years old. Um, I guess then, if we're going to take this, I guess, somewhat chronologically, I would break this section of the book into Matt hijinks and then reveals. And so in the Matt hijinks, I'm just mad Robert Jordan did not give us Matt hitting on Avienda and Avienda threatening to kill him. That sounds like an amazing scene that should have been in this book.
I agreed, and the Matt hijinks are fun.
Yeah.
Who's driving Matt? Hard to tell, right? As always,
Yeah.
but he's fun. He's got his swagger on, and that's a lot of fun.
So then I guess what I'm curious about is we had talked in the previous chapter about Moraine and her kind of new persona, right? Showing up and just like all guns blazing, let's do this thing. In this chapter, we get a very different look at Moraine than I think we've gotten all book. She, number one, admits she doesn't know things, which is a very rare look for Moraine. She seems to be almost like getting the opinions of the three other women, Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve, and seems to kind of be respecting their choices as they're talking about what they're going to do with the Black Aja. And then it's also worth noting she is just she's not domineering. She's not taking control of this conversation in a way that she does many others. And so I think she is the character who stood out the most to me, right? If this is a Matt POV chapter, the Matt we get is exactly what I expect, but the Moraine we get is not what I was expecting, even as of like 5 pages ago.
It's interesting because so much of her language and tone actually made before you started talking, essentially, I'm like, oh, he's going to talk about how she's not the one from last chapter. She's kind of back to normal. And I think what you're saying is she's not either of those old two
Right.
Moraines. She's someone new. And I think you've convinced me in the evidence you just laid out. But it does feel, other than the power dynamic kind of bundle of things, she feels not like dangerous, not on the edge of the knife. Or if she is, she's kind of safely back on the side of the light. And so those other revelations, kind of make me feel like she's just earned respect for all these characters. She's especially the women, they've kind of earned their place in the conversation with her now. And the less and less she knows, the less she can expect, the more she's going to need the others to help her. So I think, being a little diplomatic in those ways is also important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's something that you said there too about her kind of being settled that I think makes sense, right? This entire
Mm.
book, she's been really off kilter. And so now the fact that she is kind of for the first time we've seen no longer spinning on an axis that she's not used to. Like, I think you're right to highlight that. That makes a really big difference for that character. Um, I then just kind of want to give Egwene her flowers. Like, she's the one who figured out the Ishamael Baal Zaman puzzle that I think at this point in the book, you maybe could have figured it out if you were Sherlock Holmes. But this is one of those where Robert Jordan puts all the clues in front of you and never puts them together until after another character has done so. What was your thought about this kind of reveal that Baal Zaman is the big scary Forsaken, but all along he was just a Forsaken, not the Dark One in flesh?
I'm not positive I understand it. So let me tell you what I think it is, and
Yeah.
you're going to confirm or deny it. So since book one, we've been seeing Baal Zaman in dreams and in these kind of end of book conflicts.
Yep.
But what has just been revealed is that we have actually never seen Baal Zaman. We have seen Ishmael pretending to be Baal Zaman.
Two tiny corrections, although for the most part, that is
Okay.
exactly right. The first is just the name, Ishamael, not Ishmael. Uh,
Ishmael. Okay.
the second is that I want to be very careful about how we use the word Beelzebub. Beelzebub is the Trolloc name for the Dark One. So I think a better way of phrasing what you have just said is to say that Ishamael, using the name Baal-Zaman, pretended to be the Dark One, but actually wasn't. The reason I'm making that distinction is because I don't think the Dark One actually uses the word Baal-Zaman to refer to themselves. I don't think now that Ishamael is no longer using that title, that's going to be the name that we give to the Dark One for the most part. It will either be the Dark One or Shaitan. Baal Zaman is primarily the name that Ishamael was using to pretend to be the Dark One.
So we have what we're supposed to walk away from is that we've never met the true Dark One
That is correct.
across these three. We've killed a lesser henchman. The princess is not in this castle, and we're gonna go find.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is exactly right. I will note in chapter 21, the chapter where Egwene and Varen are having a conversation about the prophecy that mentions Ishamael and Baal Zaman together. That prophecy also kind of vaguely, or Varen references in that discussion, the idea that Ishamael was kind of partially free all of the time, or maybe some of the time. And so I think the story is basically that even like I think at the like first time we meet Moraine, she tells a story about Baal Zaman in the Trolloc Wars, and even that far back, it may have been Ishamael using that name.
Okay, and then fit in for me. The Dark One is being contained by the seals, which are brought
Correct.
up again here,
Yeah.
and we have now encountered three that are broken, and this one is still intact.
I believe that is correct. Yes. So of the 7 seals of the Dark One's prison, 3 are broken and have been found. 1 is intact and has been found, and there are 3 remaining, hopefully intact but location unknown seals of the Dark One's prison.
And so that fits with what we are talking about just prior to this, which is the Dark One is probably still imprisoned.
Exactly.
But Baal Zaman used his power to try to start freeing the Dark One, which again is Ishamael,
Exactly.
and not the Dark One himself. All right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Glad we wrapped that
And
up.
I need a nap.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you think that's bad, wait until we have to really break down Rand's family tree. The fun days are coming. Okay. If
Right.
that is kind of our big takeaway from the big Baal Zaman reveal, we kind of get this kind of new big piece of information. The only other thing that then stands out to me in this section is that we get a very brief introduction of a new character. Barrelane the first of Mayenne arrives. She seems stuck up. She seems insistent that she will be a part of Rand's life. And then she delivers Lanfear's letter, which seems to suggest that she has already encountered some really dark forces, even if it was only in passing. Did she as a character stand out to you, or did Lanfear's letter or the reaction that Moraine had stand out at all? I guess this is the everything but the last prophecy question. Anything in this last section of the book?
I mean, I'm gonna channel my inner Lucille Bluth and say I don't make eye contact with the help. So I just just thought it was a messenger who was just dropping something off. So she didn't really stand out to me at all. But okay, I'm excited to see some more.
Yeah. In that case, I think all that we've got left. And it was written that no hand but his should wield the sword that held in the stone. But he did draw it out like fire in his hand, and his glory did burn the world. Thus did it begin. Thus do we sing his rebirth. Thus do we sing the beginning. That's just good prophecy. I liked it.
Yeah, that's good prophecy. That's fun prophecy. And, in a meta context, book 3 is a time people would want to check out, and that makes you want to pick up book 4 and continue on this journey. So, and that matters in publishing, right? You got to keep people invested and keep it moving along. So very good bit of prophecy.
I will just note one additional thing here, which is the fact that we do get the citation for this prophecy. The citation references that this was a citation from the Fourth Age. You may remember from book 1 that we are in the Third Age. So this is a prophecy that was quoted from after the series has ended. And with that, I think we wrap up the third book of the Wheel of Time. I know we're not doing a ton of like end of book discussion here. We're going to be doing that next week. But any last thoughts on these 2 chapters before we say goodbye and hello to a new book, which is honestly much better than this one?
Yeah, it again, we'll save a lot of what I mean, I'm actually going to rethink what I was going to say. You can tell we're playing a new game where we're like, well, what do I say? I have some general thoughts, but it's kind of more towards like rating this and ranking our book so far. And I think that all fits better next week. So let's just say again, next week, a special Through the Glass Columns. You can join us without reading anything else. You can just continue on, and hopefully that helps you get your holiday shopping done and not be attached to us. So next week we'll just do a wrap-up discussion of this book and kind of how we're feeling before then or after then, or maybe before and after if you send it to us while we haven't yet recorded but have recorded but haven't posted. Tell us your thoughts. Respond to some of our Instagram posts and just say how you're feeling at the end of this journey and how things are working with you. We always appreciate feedback, especially when it really makes me actually check that account and check in with you all. And we will continue that journey on. Tyler, when are we going to do that?
So, the next time that we will be actually discussing chapters rather than just our overall thoughts and feelings about the book will be on Wednesday, January 3rd of 2024. And saying 2024 brings me pain. So I'm doing it for you. That's horrible that we are that far into the Gregorian calendar. On January 3rd, however, I will note we are only reading a single chapter from The Shadow Rising. So if you are not able to listen to our next episode or just feel like it's not worth it without any reading, we totally understand. Please rejoin us for just chapter 1 of The Shadow Rising when we begin a book that is why I love this series. Next time, Through the Glass Columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.